Welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and what a delight to have with us today Dr. Vicki Alger. She is the author of Failure. This is an incredible book, The Federal Miseducation of America's Children, and there's a picture of it there on the screen. You may want to check it out at the bookstores and certainly on Amazon. We want to talk to her about that. She is a research fellow at the Independent Institute. She's also a senior fellow at Fraser Institute, headquartered in Vancouver, British Columbia, and the Independent Women's Forum in Washington, D.C. And she's also president and CEO of Vicki Murray and Associates, LLC in Scottsdale, Arizona. And if I was to read the rest of her credentials, we would take up all our time. But what a delight, Vicki, to have you. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, well, quite the book. And I think everybody thinks this, feels this, but you kind of capsulated it. What made you go for it?
Well, I went to school in the 70s and the 80s, and as we were approaching the 30-year history, I thought, gosh, are we better off having a U.S. Department of Education than not having one? And going back through the history, it was really enlightening about all the arguments in favor. And when you look at the track record, all of the promises we were made about why we should have a cabinet-level Department of Education haven't been fulfilled. Students, families, and taxpayers in America are not better off because of a Department of Education. It's time to abolish it for good.
Well, a lot of people have said that. A lot of politicians have actually campaigned on that, but it doesn't happen. Why?
Well, we'll recall that when Ronald Reagan was president, he wanted to abolish it. Also, right after the department was first created in 1867, they downgraded it, defunded it, reshuffled it, changed the name until it resurfaced again as our cabinet-level Department of Education. I think what's different today than back in 1980 is that we have more than 60 parental choice programs in 30 states and Washington, D.C., all across the country, helping millions of children and families. And so we have shining examples of what can happen when we put parents back in charge where they belong and get Washington out.
Last night, Donald Trump did make mention of school choice and got a huge response. What you're thinking?
I'm so thrilled to hear the Republican nominee talk about parental choice in education. That's exactly where we should be having the conversation, because so often we hear, oh, schools aren't doing well because we don't have enough money, or it's usually more money. It seems to me that we've largely moved beyond that debate. Money certainly matters, but how we spend it matters more. And what we see now is evidence too great to ignore that putting parents in charge, including in charge of their children's education, if their children have special needs or they're from a disadvantaged background, you see children have higher math scores, higher reading scores, higher high school graduation rates, and higher college completion rates. So why wouldn't you put parents back in charge?
Absolutely. Okay, so it boils down to performance since the Department of Education has been there. And you can go across the board. By the way, I'm sad to report that Oregon's way down at the bottom on some of this stuff, and you probably know that. So its purpose doesn't seem to be fulfilling and producing the performance that we want.
No, because we've largely insulated schools from competition. Look at higher ed, and there are a lot of problems in higher ed. That would be a whole different program. But in the higher education landscape, you have so many different types of choices. And it's always been that way since, our colonists arrived here. It's one of the first things they did was build colleges and universities and seminaries. You look at K-12, for 100 years of our republic, we didn't have government involvement in education. It was handled locally. If children came from poor families, your churches would help support them at school, local communities. It was all handled very locally. Now in K-12, we have sort of the standard common school for K-12 that we didn't have in higher ed, and it was insulated from any kind of competition. And I think having a variety of education providers, and when I talk about providers, I'm including homeschool as well, there has to be competition for students, and that is what introduces powerful incentives for us to do our very best at the lowest possible price.
I think most would say that the education system obviously has been politicized in this country, but there's another thing that goes on, and that there's this assumption that constitutionally that the government is required to provide this. And I don't see that anywhere, do you?
No, in fact, the word education doesn't even appear in our Constitution. And if you look at the constitutional debates, when we were drafting our Constitution, James Madison so desperately wanted a role for the federal government in education. Now, it would be higher education, even when he was president. But Madison, along with Washington and Jefferson and other presidents who may have wanted a federal role, are what I call very constitutionally circumspect. Until the Constitution is amended, Congress has no authority over education, period, end of debate. It was really during the rise of the progressive era, and you see coincidentally, as there was a disdain for the Constitution, try to end run and rationalize how we could have a larger federal role. At the same time, we were denigrating and dismissing parents. The progressive era, we couldn't possibly trust parents. Who knows what they might do with their children? That was the thinking.
There's also a continuing battle between federal involvement, Department of Education, and states' departments of education as they filter on down to local schools. How contentious is this?
I think it started getting contentious under George Bush with the No Child Left Behind, and it certainly reached a boiling point now under Obama with Common Core, because for all the slick PR we hear, it was very much a DC-driven reform that is highly politicized, academically mediocre at best, and hugely expensive. And the federal government isn't even coming close to paying for the costs of those programs.
The unions got involved, as you well know. The NEA is extremely powerful. Could that ever, if the Department of Education was to be disbanded, what would the NEA do?
Well, I'll leave that up for the NEA to decide what they'll be doing with all that free time. But there's a huge irony in what's going on now, as everybody knows, and as people made explicit during the debates on whether or not to establish a U.S. Department of Education in the late 70s. They had their hands very much in this fight. Well, now look at what the U.S. Department of Education is getting behind. Public charter schools, public school choice, testing, various teacher quality programs, incentive pay for teachers or performance pay for teachers. That's not what they signed up for at all. So I think there's a bit of irony that the U.S. Department of Education had been called a creature of the NEA. Well, the creature's turning around to bite them in the ankles a bit.
Whoa. All right, before we take a break, one of the other complaints about education is that it's always used as the political tool to raise taxes or to get more revenue. Mm-hmm. And when that is accomplished, it never trickles down to the classroom. Somehow it gets stuck in administration. Isn't that the problem?
That's a huge part of the problem. In fact, you can see trends. If you start from go back to 1940s, 1950s, at a typical American school district, teachers would far outnumber administrators. And that's as it should be, because administrators could be worth their weight in gold, because they're supposed to free teachers to focus on their students in the classroom. Well, flash forward to today, and it's at best 50-50 in any given school, with teachers and administrators basically equal. In some states, the average is more administrators than teachers. Yet with all these administrators, teachers are reporting that they have more paperwork and administrative burdens than ever before that are taking them away from the classroom. And a huge driver of that are all these federal mandates and federal paperwork. And let's not forget, for every dollar we send to DC for education, we get maybe 10 cents back.
Wow. All right, let me take a break, because the other thing is that, and you're touching on it, is what's now required to maintain this. Our president now made a threat, no more federal dollars based upon gender neutrality as it relates to schools, bathrooms, and locker rooms. That's another issue. And then the overall socialization of the agenda, or at least of the curriculum, maybe I should say. I think people have been saying this is just costing us too much and we're getting too little out of it. We'll be right back. The book is entitled Failure, The Federal Miseducation of America's Children. And when you see the book, you see the word miseducation, it is purposely misspelt. There it is. And check it out by Vicki Alger, and we'll be right back with her in just a moment.
I'm Paulina Leiser, producer of Focus Today. Thank you for watching this video, and make sure to check our other videos at theDove.us.
Welcome back, and what a delight to have with us today Dr. Vicki Alger. She's authored a book that's really quite fascinating, Failure, the Federal Miseducation of America's Children. Now, I think we've all thought of this, feel this at times. It's an incredible argument, but this is a book I think you need to take a look at and get a hold of it. It's very resourceful, and I'm sure you can get it online at Amazon. There it is. And it is done as an independent study, and I think you'll find the results of this to be pretty fascinating. Vicki, so many things here to kind of, I wish I had you for about a week because this is an incredible thing, but let me ask you this. Schools now have become dependent upon federal dollars. And we knew that, but then it was really emphasized this past month or so when the president came out with his gender-neutral bathrooms and locker rooms statement and said it would be tied directly to your dollars coming to your school from the feds. I mean, that's a hostage situation, but how important is federal dollars to schools?
Well, it represents maybe 10% on average of any school's budget, but when you look, you hit the nail on the head. Schools are so dependent on that 10% that the irony is they're willing to go along with that 10%, even though the compliance costs are usually far higher than what they're getting back. And with the issue, this issue, under the guise of civil rights, you talk to most school principals, superintendents, they've already had policies in place to make sure all children are safe at school. They've had those policies in place for a long time. So this is a situation of basically making it a political issue.
All right, let's go down that road just for a moment. It appears that even the curriculum in public education has been politicized. In fact, more is being spent on political correctness education than there perhaps is on the 3 R's. Is that a fair statement?
It couldn't be more fair. In fact, if you look at what the California State Board of Education just passed, they just approved their new history and social sciences framework. And I have to tell you, I made it through about 85% and I had to stop. I knew it was going to be bad with the politicization, the bad history and so forth. It was worse than I'm even accustomed to, and that's saying a lot. Why should we care if we don't live in California? California has the largest proportion of K-12 school children in the country. So textbooks are going to be gearing their wares towards their largest audience, and then that's going to trickle down in one form or another. So I would urge parents to please read the standards in your states, what your children are being exposed to, because if you were to read the standards, you would think this was a sex ed class because it's talking about all the gender identity, not so much history. It's basically all sex all the time, as far as I could tell, starting as early as second grade. Schools have no business talking about these very sensitive issues. That should be handled by parents so that their faith is reinforced, not just in the home, but outside the home.
Well, and then the other thing to emphasize, if the state of California is successful of going after private schools, and in particular religious schools, leaving the public school as the arbiter of all education, what have we done to ourselves?
Well, and here's the thing too, what I'm seeing, and you would think, well, Arizona is, has it's as close to heaven on earth as you can get in terms of education with all the parental choice that we have. We still have to fight too. So many parents for the past several years have legitimate concerns about exposing their children in public schools to Common Core influence testing and all that goes along with that. And so they've been opting out. and they're being threatened, they're being intimidated, their children are being threatened and intimidated. So what we're seeing is a rise in homeschooling. And I think the more government tries to impose these political agendas, because you're right, this is nothing to do with academics. This is all agendizing children. We're going to see rise in private schooling where we can have it, and also homeschooling.
All right, so bottom line, failure. Public school is a failure, and I know a lot of people, I'll hear from this every time I talk about education. But anyway, what's the remedy here, Vicki? What do we do? What do parents do? I mean, do we push for a voucher system? Do we eliminate the Department of Education? I mean, we'll pick a fight. Yeah.
I would say first, yes, all of the above. The first thing that we could do is right off the bat right now, we eliminated Department of Education. We don't have the physical plant and all the associated costs. That's $14.1 billion that's restored to the taxpayers in the form of a federal income tax rebate. Number two, you go through all the programs that are left, and that's going to be over $275 billion plus another $250 million in associated salaries that get returned to the states. All those programs are now administered at the state level until their pre-existing expiration date, and then people in the taxpayers in the states decide, wow, are these good programs, are these effective or not? But the final thing that parents have to do, fight for not just vouchers, which are publicly subsidized scholarships, tax credit scholarships. Those are privately financed. My favorite innovation right now are educational savings accounts. Parents who don't prefer public school inform the state, and the state deposits 90% of what it would have sent to the public schools into that child's ESA instead. Parents use a dedicated use debit card, and they buy tuition, tutoring, special education therapies, and so forth. And any money left over stays in that child's account for a college savings account. I love that because it puts parents back in the driver's seat and putting parents more directly in charge of their children's education dollars.
All right, are you seeing this happening?
Yes, 5 states, including my home state of Arizona. We were the first one to have it. 5 states have it now. I would say Nevada's program is the strongest because all children are eligible for their program.
All right, so I would assume that this is going to be growing.
Yes.
And as liberal as we are in Oregon, I do know that grassroots families are saying, wait a minute, something's wrong here and we need a change.
Yes.
All right.
Absolutely.
All right, so as this movement grows, what can people do? I mean, do they contact their legislators? Is it a bill we put on the ballot? What do we do here?
I would say that first and foremost, we contact our representatives in Congress. We say we do not want the U.S. Department of Education. We just reauthorized the Every Student Succeeds Act. It's the biggest K-12 longest standing piece of congressional education legislation out there. And we were promised flexibility. We were promised that the states would have more control. And guess what? We still have to approve our state education plans. You know, we have to get DC's approval. That is not the way things are supposed to work. So in addition to contacting our representatives in Washington, D.C., we have to stand up in the states and say we are not going to be bribed with our own money. Because let's not forget, the money, there is no such thing as a federal dollar. It is money that we have earned, tax dollars that we send to Washington. Tell our locally elected representatives we will not be bribed with our own tax dollars. We want our money for education to stay in our state and in our communities. And so don't go along with this, oh gosh, but we won't get our federal dollars back. You're going to be spending more than you'd ever get back.
The pushback in Common Core has been quite interesting and in some cases very significant. You think that's growing?
I think Common Core awoke a sleeping giant because there are so many parents out there who've already made sacrifices, moving to the neighborhoods where their preferred public schools are, and they've made their choice. And all of a sudden, their children are being exposed to all sorts of things, including Common Core testing, that they didn't sign up for. We haven't even gotten into the student privacy concerns that parents have. The bottom line is, once you pick a school for your child does not become the creature of the state. And that's exactly how too many children are being treated, and parents are fighting back. And so we're seeing droves of parents just opting their children out.
At the end of the day, are we graduating students who are passing the basic entrance exams for higher education?
No, children are not prepared, and young people are not prepared, and it's heartbreaking because these are young people who've done everything they were told. They've done everything they thought was right. They got the grades. They passed these state assessments, and let's not forget, we're always changing what the state assessment is in response to the latest federal mandate. So students are doing what they thought was right, and then they get to college. In two-year colleges, we have remediation rates that are higher than 50%. When you're looking at four-year college and university, it could be 25% up to a third. So we're not being very clear about our expectations. Whereas you look at private schools and homeschooling situations, the students are much better prepared because the focus is different. It's on the academics. It's not on all the agendas.
Amazing. Well, thanks for being the hawk you are. The book's available. What do you want people to get out of the book? What's the end result you want them to get?
What I want, it's a hopeful book. That's why I end it with, look to all the examples of successful parental choice programs. If we put, parents have a God-given unalienable right to oversee the upbringing and education of their children. Once we affirm that, we support that, that's what's working, and that's what we have to fight to restore.
All right, the book is entitled Failure, The Federal Miseducation of America's Children. Let me encourage you to check it out at Amazon, at the bookstores. I think you'll find it to be a great resource. Again, Vicki, thank you for your work and for being the watchdog that you are. Let's stay connected on this, especially it goes through the election. It'll be interesting. I'm sure you're going to see one side push more federal involvement and another side, as mentioned last night, hey, parents should have a choice. So
yes.
It looks like it's on the table for debate. That's a good thing.
That is a good thing.
All right. Thanks for your time. Have a great weekend.
You too. Thank you.
Okay. We'll be right back.